There is a building on Cyprus and the doors will not open. Inside are the councilmen of Salamis, the town senate. Outside are horsemen, Roman cavalry in a Roman province doing something cavalry was never built to do, standing around a door. Nobody storms the building, nobody burns it, that's the point. The horsemen simply wait, because waiting is cheaper. Days pass, then more days, and inside that chamber 5 men starve to death. Nobody in Rome will call this a massacre. It isn't one. It's a collections procedure. The horsemen work for a creditor. The creditor wants his rate. The rate is 48%. And the creditor, the man those councilmen owe, the man whose agent brought the cavalry, is Rome's idea of an honest man. Not an honest man, the honest man, a philosopher, a man who wrote a book called On Virtue. His name is Marcus Junius Brutus. Yes, that one. But the worst thing in this story is not the 5 dead men. He never broke a law, not one. The loan, the rate, the cavalry, every step of it was authorized by the Senate, by a governor's signature, and we can prove it because the paperwork survives. You are only hearing about any of this because one man in that province opened the books and wrote down what he found. Not a historian, not a monument. Private letters to a friend, never meant to reach you. Follow this man's accounts out of that locked room and they don't stop in Rome. They end 2,000 years later in a London auction room at $4.19 million, and then in a New York courtroom. We'll get there. Rome did not think of Brutus as a hero. Rome used him as a unit of measurement, the way a mint keeps a reference weight, the thing you check every other weight against. When a Roman wanted to say this man cannot be bought, he said, he's like Brutus. He earned it, on paper. Take the night before Pharsalus, the battle that would decide who owned the Roman world. Every other officer in that camp spent it drinking or praying or lying awake. Brutus sat in his tent and wrote out a summary of Polybius, a Greek historian, long dead, homework, on the eve of the end of the world. That's the man, not brave exactly, something colder and more impressive than brave, unbothered. And he wrote books. One of them was called De Virtute, On Virtue. He sent a copy to Cicero, the best lawyer in Rome and not a humble man. And Cicero said in print that this book is the reason he took up philosophy at all. His words, "The most welcome book you sent me, On Virtue." Hold that sentence. It is going to turn out to be the worst thing anyone in this story ever said. One more line on the resume and it's almost too neat. As a young man, Brutus sailed to Cyprus with his uncle Cato. The job? Guard a royal treasury. Count somebody else's money. Plutarch mentions it as a slightly demeaning errand. Real gentlemen don't do bookkeeping. The man who lived through that chamber said something afterwards that should not be arithmetically possible. A few years on, a new Roman governor lands on that coast and refuses the gift. Every province paid one. A present for the man Rome sent to rule it. Voluntary the way a tip is voluntary when the waiter is holding your car keys. This governor said no. The same man, as it happens, who took Brutus's book, Cicero. And the councilmen told him what his honesty was worth to them. They could settle with the creditor, they said, out of the money he had just declined to take. The gift ran larger than their entire debt. The bribe they didn't have to pay one honest Roman was bigger than the debt 5 of them starved over. How does a town end up there? Look at the machine. The machine is the murder weapon. A Roman province was not a country Rome governed. It was an account Rome drew on. And the withdrawals ran on a schedule. Every year a provincial city owed Rome money. Taxes, the upkeep of the governor and his staff, the gift, and the cost of sending ambassadors to Rome to lobby the Senate, very little of which was ever spent on travel. The cities did not have that money sitting in a box. So they borrowed it. They borrowed money from Romans to pay Romans so that Romans would not punish them for failing to pay Romans. So, who lends? Senators had the money. Senators also could not be seen doing this. Not with their own name on the contract, not at these rates. Rome had rules about appearances. Rome had a great many rules, and every single one of them had a door in it. So the money goes out through a front man, an agent. The senator's name never touches the paper, and the agent carries the one asset a debtor cannot ignore. He knows somebody who can send soldiers. That's the machine. Debt with cavalry attached. Everything I have just described was normal, legal, routine, and boring to a Roman. Rome had a procedure for every part of it. For what Brutus did next, Rome had to write a new one. Salamis needed cash. Brutus's friends were willing to supply it. There was a problem. A Roman law made the loan illegal. Cities sent their envoys to Rome to borrow, and Romans were forbidden to lend to them there. Brutus's money was on the wrong side of that. Most rich men, facing an inconvenient law, look for a loophole. Brutus didn't look for a loophole. The law went to the Senate, and the Senate suspended it. Not repealed, that would be a principle. Suspended specifically for this one transaction. Cicero's account is blunt. Brutus's friends, relying on Brutus's influence, were happy to lend at 48%, provided the Senate covered them. And the decree passed. Cicero's own phrase for how it passed, gratia bruti, as a favor to Brutus. Then the silver went out. Later, when somebody noticed that an illegal contract might be awkward to enforce in court, they went back and got a second decree, declaring that this particular bond would be good at law. So let's be precise about the charge, because it isn't the one you were expecting. He didn't break the law. The law was rewritten around him. Twice. So, the rate. 4% a month. At that rate, a debt doesn't grow. It breathes. Let the interest run on the interest. And 48% doubles what you owe in under 18 months. Not in a lifetime. Not in a generation. Between one harvest and the harvest after next. And Scaptius, the collector, didn't even bother compounding it. He billed it flat. 48% a year, 6 years running. Simple interest, no tricks. It still multiplied the debt by almost 4. He didn't need the compound interest. He had the cavalry. That is not a loan. That is a debt built never to be paid. And here is the document that makes it personal. Cicero will one day hold in his hand a memorandum from Brutus himself. And what it says is this: the people of Salamis owe money to Marcus Scaptius and Publius Vatinius, my friends. My friends, not me. Brutus kept his name off that contract, and here he is, putting that in writing, in his own words. It wasn't his only file either. Inland, the king of Cappadocia, the poorest king Cicero says he ever laid eyes on, paid Brutus in a single year roughly 100 talents. A broke king, on a payment plan. In 51 BC, Cicero is sent east to govern Cilicia. Cyprus comes with it. He arrives determined to be the one clean Roman in the east. No gifts, no gratuities, and a hard cap on interest in his edict. 12%, a quarter of what Brutus's men are charging. And he means it. And almost the moment he lands, envoys from Cyprus find him with a complaint. There is a cavalry unit sitting on their island, not fighting anyone, collecting. Cicero orders the horsemen off Cyprus that day. Then he meets the man holding the contract, Scaptius. And Scaptius explains that he is owed 200 talents, in Roman money, 4.8 million sesterces. That number is about to be humiliated. Then Cicero does something almost no Roman governor bothers with. He asks the debtors, not the creditor, what they think they owe. They say, 106 talents. So they sit down and do the arithmetic. The governor of the province and the surviving members of a town council, working through 6 years of interest together. And then Cicero writes the 5 words that make this entire story checkable, 2,000 years later. It agreed to a penny. The debtors' books were honest. The creditor's number was inflated by 94 talents that existed for exactly one reason, 48%. No source tells us what Salamis originally borrowed, but run Cicero's ruling backwards, 12%, compounding over 6 years, and the number falls out on its own. About 53 talents, 53 borrowed, 106 owed, honestly, 200 demanded. Do that last one yourself if you like. 53 talents plus 48% a year, 6 years running. You land just over 200, which is exactly what Scaptius put on the bill. Scaptius wasn't cheating. He was charging. Put a price on that. Years earlier, Caesar was sleeping with Brutus's mother. As a gift, he bought her a pearl. 1 pearl. Suetonius records what it cost. 6 million sesterces. Scaptius came to Salamis for 4.8. Caesar spent more on a single bead for Brutus's mother than Brutus's men came to collect from an entire town. The loan, the 6 years, the 48%, the whole inflated demand. Every talent they were prepared to starve a council chamber for. And measured against what Salamis actually borrowed, 53 talents, 1.25 million sesterces. That 1 pearl was worth nearly 5 times the loan. Rome could always find the money. It simply preferred to find it in Salamis. The money is counted out on the table. The full amount under the governor's ruling. Real silver in front of witnesses. and Scaptius refuses to take it. He doesn't want 106 talents, he wants the rate. Cicero on that. It could not be done, and if it could, I could not have allowed it. Now the thing I have to say out loud, because if I don't, you'll rightly assume I'm hiding it. Brutus did not ride to Cyprus. Brutus did not lock that door. The man at the door was Scaptius, and the cavalry was not Brutus's private army. It was Roman state cavalry, handed to Scaptius by the previous governor, who had turned a debt collector into a military officer with a stroke of a pen. That is the actual scandal. Nobody broke the chain of command. The Republic lent its army to a private creditor the way you'd lend a neighbor a van. And about those 5 men, Cicero writes it down twice. Once vaguely, some of them died of hunger. Once exactly, 5. He wasn't writing for us. He was writing to a friend. He had no reason to round up. They weren't Roman senators, by the way. They were the town council of Salamis. Local men, the kind who get sent to negotiate with a creditor because they're the ones everybody trusts. Then comes the part Cicero would rather you skipped. The councilmen have a legal move. They can deposit the money in a temple, and the moment they do, the interest stops running. The debt freezes. They ask to do it. And Cicero, the honest governor, the one clean Roman, asks them not to. He writes it down himself in a letter to his best friend, knowing exactly how it looks. The interest ought to have stopped. They wished to deposit the sum in a temple, but I begged them not to raise the point. And then, I allowed Brutus all this privilege. Nobody in this story has clean hands. Cicero's are only cleaner, and he knows it. Meanwhile, Brutus keeps writing to him, with a request. He wants Cicero to make Scaptius a prefect. A prefect is a military office. A military office comes with soldiers. He is asking the governor to give his debt collector soldiers. After the council chamber, after. Cicero refuses. And Atticus, the friend he tells everything, the friend who kept the letters, writes back to smooth it over. Come on, it's a small thing, not more than 50 horsemen. Cicero's reply is the coldest line in the correspondence. It's a joke. It is not a joke. Spartacus had fewer men than that at first. That is the comparison the honest governor reaches for. Not a bailiff, a slave army. Oh, and the island where all of this is happening. Cyprus. The same island where, as a young man, Brutus had been sent to guard somebody else's treasury and thought the arithmetic beneath him. So, justice then? The cavalry is gone. The rate is cut from 48 to 12. The town's arithmetic is vindicated in writing by the governor of the province. Except, Plutarch wrote an entire admiring biography of Brutus and never mentions the loan. Not once. Neither does Cassius Dio. This whole episode survives in one place, private letters from Cicero to Atticus. That's the file. If Atticus had thrown away his mail, Brutus would be exactly what the statues say he is. And yes, our only witness is a man defending his own conduct to a friend, which is precisely why I believe him. Nobody inventing a story to flatter himself writes down, I begged them not to raise the point. I allowed Brutus all this privilege. Cicero's letters convict Cicero. That is what makes them evidence. In February of 50 BC, with the Salamis file open on his desk, Cicero sets down the line this whole story has been walking toward. If Brutus really believes that rate should have been enforced, if that is who he is, then I shall be sorry that he is angry with me, but I shall be far sorrier to discover that he is not the man I thought he was. And now pick up the sentence I asked you to hold. Because on virtue, Brutus's book, the book that made Cicero a philosopher, had not been written yet. Brutus wrote it after Salamis, after the locked chamber, after the 5. And the one fragment that survives is Brutus describing a Roman exile on a Greek island, a man with no office, no city, and no way home, and calling him as happy as a human being can get. And Cicero, who had read the file, who had done the arithmetic, who had written, "He is not the man I thought he was," took the book, praised it, and 5 years later he published his own treatise, dedicated it to Brutus, and thanked him in print for the most welcome book you sent me. On virtue. He knew. He knew all of it, and he praised the book anyway. That is not Rome forgetting. That is Rome deciding. What happened to the debt after Cicero sailed home, nobody wrote down. There is no closing entry. Rome kept receipts for everything. It did not keep this one. Nobody ever made Brutus answer for Salamis. Nobody was ever going to. So he did it again, bigger, with an army. And this time, he minted the proceeds. The Ides of March, 23 wounds, and Brutus is holding one of the knives. He did it, he says, because Caesar was behaving like a king, because a republic cannot have one man standing above the law. Now he needs an army. Armies are not free. So he goes east, back to the provinces that have already been bled once, and he collects. The city of Xanthos refuses him and is besieged and burns. And here I'll be fair to him, because the sources are, Plutarch says Brutus rode around the outside of that city with his hands out, begging the Xanthians to save themselves, and offered a cash prize to any soldier who could pull a Lycian out alive. 150 were pulled out alive. From Lycia as a whole, Plutarch tells us, Brutus took 150 talents. 150 men lived, 150 talents left. Rome kept better books on the second number. The neighboring city of Patara looks at the ashes and surrenders everything. Brutus orders the city to hand over its gold and silver, and every citizen to bring in his private savings. Informers are promised rewards, and a slave takes the offer. He informs on his own master's hidden gold. Brutus crucifies him, not the master he lets go, with the gold. The informer. Executed, Appian says, for the nerve of informing on a man above him. That's Brutus. He'll take your savings. He just won't be rude about it. Then a Thracian princess hands him her dead husband's treasury. Gold and silver, an unexpected amount of it. And Appian tells us, very casually, what Brutus did with it. This he coined and converted into currency. To see what he did with that money, go back 2 years, January, 44 BC. For the first time in the history of the Roman Republic, the face of a living Roman appears on Roman money. Caesar's face. Rome had put gods on its coins. Rome had put dead ancestors on its coins. A living face on money was what kings did. The Hellenistic kings across the water, the ones Rome told itself it was nothing like. No Roman writer spells this out for us. It's a reading, not a quotation. In Rome, nobody needed it said. 2 months later, Brutus and his friends stabbed Caesar to death for behaving like a king. And then Brutus, with a mint traveling behind his army, the same mint that had just turned a widow's inheritance into spending money, issued a coin of his own. On one side, 2 daggers, and between them, the cap they put on a slave's head the day he was set free. And 2 words, EID MAR, the Ides of March, the date of the murder, stamped into metal. And on the front, in the spot Caesar had taken 2 years earlier, Brutus put his own face. This isn't a modern reading. Cassius Dio says it flatly. Brutus stamped upon the coins his own likeness, and a cap, and 2 daggers. The man who killed a tyrant for putting his face on money, put his face on money. That same year, Brutus marches that army, and the mint traveling behind it, to Philippi to fight for the Republic. And Plutarch tells us what the army looked like. Most of their armor was covered in gold and silver, not looted and stuffed in a wagon, worn, on the body, into the line. Brutus did that deliberately. He believed that wealth a man carries on his person makes the ambitious braver and the greedy more warlike, because a soldier will fight for his own armor the way he fights for his own money. That is the theory of human nature held by the author of On Virtue. Money, he thought, was what made men fight. It didn't work. He lost anyway. And on the second day at Philippi, Marcus Junius Brutus killed himself. Antony found the body and covered it with his own cloak. Then he had the ashes sent home to Brutus's mother, to Servilia, the woman with the pearl. Everything in this story goes back into the same house. Brutus is ash in a jar in his mother's house. The coin is not. 2,061 years after it left Brutus's mint, the coin comes up for sale. October 2020, London. A gold EID MAR, one of only 3 known to exist, sells for $4.19 million. The most expensive ancient coin ever sold anywhere by anyone. The other two are in museums. One of them has a hole punched through it. A coin only gets a hole for one reason. Somebody wore it, hung the assassination around their neck where people could see. And what the buyer in London is buying is liberty. That's the pitch. 2 daggers, a freedman's cap, the date a republic defended itself. You are not purchasing metal. You are purchasing the most famous act of principle in Western history, and it fits in your palm. The coin was stolen. According to the Manhattan District Attorney, it had been dug out of the ground, smuggled out of Greece, and dressed in a fake paper trail. Somebody bought it in Munich in 2015 for 450,000 euros, cash, no documents. Then it was given a history, the way you'd give a horse a pedigree. It was seized. In March 2023, it went back to Greece. The head of the auction house pleaded guilty in a New York courtroom. The auction house no longer exists. A coin struck by an army that paid for itself out of other people's savings, sold for $4.19 million as a symbol of freedom. And it turned out to be stolen property. It was always stolen property. Rome could always find the money. It simply preferred to find it in Salamis. The rate was 48%. Nobody knows whether a single coin of it was ever paid. 5 men died of it anyway.